My name is Yara Whitfield. I am 36 years old, a former United States Navy Special Operations Officer with 15 years of service. I have led missions in places the government will never admit we were. I have seen men fall beside me and carried the weight of their names in silence. But nothing in my military career prepared me for the battlefield I faced today. The military courtroom was cold and echoing, a place where truth could be drowned in procedure. My father sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a tailored Navy suit that looked more like armor than clothing. His arms were folded, his jaw tight, but his eyes, those calculating eyes, were locked on me with the same disapproval I had seen since childhood. Beside him sat Judge Harrison Cole, gavel in hand, his silver hair neatly combed, his uniform immaculate. Cole was more than just a judge. He was my father's old academy friend, a man who had shared drinks and secrets with him long before I was born. Their connection was no mystery. The glances they exchanged told me everything I needed to know about how today's proceedings would go. Cole's voice cut through the stillness like a whip. "You are weak. Your testimony is worthless." His eyes flicked toward my father, and the faintest smirk tugged at his mouth. It was the smirk of a man who believed the game was already won. My father mirrored it, leaning back in his chair as if he could already taste victory. I had seen this before. Powerful men convinced they were untouchable. They thought my silence meant defeat. They thought the years since Silverfish had worn me down, broken my will. But they had no idea what I carried. I rose from my seat, the sound of my chair scraping across the polished floor, drawing every eye in the room. My shoes clicked against the tile with each step toward the microphone. I stopped, straightened my shoulders, and bowed my head slightly, not in deference, but in precision. Then I said it, 2 words. "Shadow Vesper." The change was instantaneous. Cole's smirk vanished. His hand twitched, the gavel slipping from his grip and striking the bench with a sharp crack. Papers rustled as the sound echoed. Several officers shifted in their seats. Cole's voice, once sharp, was suddenly thin. How do you know that name?" I held his gaze. I didn't answer. The weight of those 2 words was answer enough. Across the room, the smirk on my father's face faltered, replaced by the first shadow of uncertainty I had ever seen there. Around us, the air shifted. Senior officers in the gallery exchanged glances. One removed a secure phone from his pocket, speaking in hushed tones. Another stood abruptly and left the room, his movements quick and purposeful. In an instant, the tribunal no longer belonged to Cole or my father. It belonged to the ghost I had just summoned into the open. They thought I was here to defend myself. They were wrong. I was here to expose them. The gavel's fall still echoed in my mind, but it carried me somewhere else entirely. To another sound, sharper, deadlier, the crack of gunfire tearing through walls 3 years ago. My ears had rung then, too. I had tasted dust and blood, felt the concussive force rattle my bones. 6 men, my team, my brothers. None of them had walked out of that place alive. Now I stood in this courtroom, the only one left to carry their story, and I felt them here with me. The truth about Silverfish had been buried under layers of classification, lies, and political convenience. My refusal to follow the order that night had been painted as insubordination. The fact that it had saved civilians was erased. The fact that the mission had been compromised before we even stepped onto the ground, no one wanted that on record. I glanced at my father, his brow furrowed slightly, but not with concern, only calculation. He didn't understand what I had just done, not yet. My right thumb moved instinctively, tracing the jagged scar that crossed my left palm. It was a habit I could not break. I had earned it the night I dragged a wounded comrade out of a kill zone. My hands torn on shattered glass as I pulled him to cover. He hadn't survived, but I had carried that scar ever since. It was my reminder, my promise. I would not let their deaths mean nothing. I looked back to Cole. His eyes were still fixed on me, wide now, the self-assured authority drained from them. For years he had spoken my name in contempt. Today he could barely speak it at all. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, but it was not empty. It was charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. The man in the dark suit moved first. He stepped into the well of the court, leaned toward Cole, and spoke in a low, urgent tone. Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. His knuckles were pale against the bench. This tribunal will recess for 60 minutes, Cole said finally, his voice strained. Chairs scraped back, murmurs swelled in the gallery. I stayed where I was, watching the controlled chaos unfold. One officer spoke rapidly into his phone, another slipped out a side door. I lowered myself back into my seat. Across the aisle, my father turned to look at me for the first time that day. It was not the look of a parent, it was the look of a man who had just lost the advantage and did not yet understand how. He held my gaze for several seconds, searching for an explanation, for some sign of weakness he could exploit. I gave him nothing. In the distance, I could hear the measured footsteps of those who had just been called into this fight, people my father and Cole had not expected to see today. The storm I had unleashed was already moving through the building. I folded my hands on the table, my thumb once again resting on that scar. 60 minutes was more than enough time. When this tribunal resumed, neither my father nor Harrison Cole would be in control of the room, and they both knew it. When the tribunal recessed, I knew the next hour would decide more than just the outcome of a court case. It would decide whether my mother's last wishes would be honored or erased. My mother, Elaine Whitfield, had been a quiet force in my life. She never wore her strength on her sleeve, but I saw it every day in the way she held our family together when my father's military career kept him distant. She had grown up in a modest home and built everything she had through years of discipline and self-reliance. Her estate was not vast by the standards of powerful military families, but it was significant enough to matter, enough to become a target. Before she passed, she made it clear in her will that her assets, our family home, a piece of land in Virginia, her savings, would come to me. She left small, thoughtful bequests to others, but the heart of her estate was mine. She said it was not just inheritance, it was her acknowledgement of the life I had chosen, the sacrifices I had made in service to the country. I never asked for it, but I understood her reasoning. She passed suddenly, before she could see me return from my final deployment. By the time I was home, my father had remarried. The woman he chose was younger, polished, and ambitious in a way that made me uneasy. It was clear from our first meeting that she wanted to consolidate the household under her influence. I told myself it was none of my concern, until the legal notices started arriving. According to my father, my conduct during Operation Silverfish had brought disgrace to the Whitfield name. He claimed my refusal to obey an order, and the subsequent press coverage had damaged the family's standing in military society. On that basis, he petitioned the court to declare me unfit to inherit. It was absurd. The will was clear, and nothing in the law allowed such a petition without evidence of fraud or incapacity. But my father had two things: influence and Judge Harrison Cole. Cole had been my father's ally for decades. They had served in the same naval circles, their careers intertwining in ways I never fully understood. He owed my father favors, and my father knew it. That connection meant this was never going to be a fair hearing. Every motion my attorney filed met resistance. Every objection was brushed aside. Cole's demeanor from the bench left no doubt. He intended to deliver my father the verdict he wanted. I could almost understand a stranger questioning my record, given how the official story had been told. But my own father, that was harder to swallow. He had not once asked me for the truth about that night in Silverfish. He had not wanted to know why I had made the call I did, or what it had cost me. Instead, he saw an opportunity. If he could strip me of my inheritance, he could pass the estate to his new wife, and by extension, her family. In our only private exchange before the tribunal began, he had looked at me with that same cold calculation I had seen when he decided whether to back an officer's promotion or let their career stall. "This is nothing personal," he said, as if those words could strip the malice from his intent. "It's about preserving the family's reputation. You've done enough damage." I stood there, listening, realizing that the man in front of me cared more about the optics of his last name than the bloodline it came from. For him, the estate was not about the land or the home or the savings. It was about control. Taking it from me was just another maneuver in a lifetime of strategic positioning. By the time we walked into the tribunal, I had already made my decision. I would not beg for his approval, and I would not try to appeal to some imagined shred of paternal loyalty. I had something far stronger than sentiment. I had the truth, and I had a weapon he did not see coming. This lawsuit was his battlefield, but I had fought on ground far more treacherous than this. If he thought a biased judge and a rehearsed narrative could break me, he had forgotten who I was. My father had demanded everything, and he believed he had the right allies to take it. But what neither he nor Cole understood was that they had walked me right into a place where their power was most fragile. The inheritance was my mother's gift. Protecting it was more than a legal fight. It was the last promise I could keep to her. And when the tribunal resumed, I would make sure that promise was honored in full. 3 years earlier, before lawyers and petitions, I carried a different weight. Command sat on my shoulders like a rucksack I never took off. I was the officer in charge of a 7-person special operations element, 6 operators, and me. We moved when others hesitated. We read the ground like a map of intent. We listened for the lie braided through clean intelligence. The title on my orders was simple: the work never was, and the cost of a mistake was always paid in blood. The last mission came dressed as a standard hostage rescue. The brief named a humanitarian doctor and 2 local aides as captives of a breakaway cell. Time-sensitive, high-risk, decisive action required. Slide 1 marked an abandoned textile warehouse near a river district as the objective. Slide 2 stacked satellite stills in a neat sequence with arrows and captions. Slide 3 showed a communications diagram that looked orderly and persuasive. It looked right, it felt wrong. In our line of work, feelings often signal facts we cannot yet prove. During the briefing, a current tugged at me the way a river grips your calves. The imagery was too clean. 2 timestamps disagreed with weather logs calling for overcast. Thermal signatures read like a training deck. Heat blooms without expected noise from adjacent structures. No vent plumes on the roofline. A side camera showed a delivery truck idling near a door that never appeared in the overhead stills. I asked the intelligence lead to reconcile the frames. He said separate partners, minor mismatches, nothing critical. The clock was ticking. I had seen tidy lies before. They arrived with tidy charts. I requested a short delay to cross-check the source chain. Denied. I asked for a second human source on the hostages. Denied. I proposed a low-visibility reconnaissance element to validate the ingress route. Denied again. The oversight colonel on the call said the window was closing. A team in another theater would take it if we would not. He dressed pressure as urgency and spoke like a man who would never carry consequences. My voice went calm. Copy all. We will execute. Send final updates now. Back in the team room, my 6 were quiet. Chief Morales rolled a river stone between his fingers. He had picked it up on a training beach years earlier. He set it on the table and tapped it once. That was our ritual. If one fell, those who walked away would place a small stone on the grave, a promise to carry weight without performance. Morales smiled at me, tired but steady. If we were alive tomorrow, we each owed a stone. If one was not, the rest would pay. We planned anyway. Professionals plan when the plan feels wrong and the clock says, go. I built an alternate exfil route along a drainage cut. I added a soft breach option on a secondary door. I shifted the breacher to rear security and moved our medic forward by 1. Small, conservative adjustments. The kind that admit doubt without letting fear steer. I sent a final request to the watch officer. If the hostages were inside, 5 minutes would not harm them. If not, 5 minutes might spare us a trap. We launched at dusk and moved like we had drilled. The first door was unlocked. The second opened too easily. A round snapped from the wrong quadrant. The warehouse was bait. I called abort. Break contact. New route south. Some reached the corner. Not all did. I woke sewn and scarred. The report ignored the stones. My relationship with my father was never built on warmth. From my earliest memories, he was a man who measured worth by performance, not affection. In our house, victories were celebrated, mistakes were dissected. There was no middle ground. I remember being 8 years old, standing on a soccer field in the rain, shivering after a loss. He didn't ask if I was cold or hungry. He told me that losing was a choice, and that Whitfields didn't choose to lose. That lesson was repeated in different forms for years. In classrooms, on athletic fields, even in the way he graded my posture when I stood at attention in my ROTC uniform. It shaped me. I learned to push harder, aim higher, and hide weakness. When I earned my commission, he shook my hand like a commanding officer, not a parent. When I deployed for the first time, he told me not to embarrass him. Pride in his language was always conditional. After Silverfish, when I came home with scars and 6 folded flags, I thought, despite everything, that he might ask. Ask what happened. Ask why I had made the call I did. Ask how it felt to stand alive when the rest of my team lay still. But the question never came. We met once in his study, the smell of his cigar smoke curling through the air. He didn't sit down. "You made this family a subject of gossip," he said, voice sharp as the crease in his uniform trousers. "You brought the wrong kind of attention. You made us look weak." I told him civilians had lived because I refused the order. He didn't flinch. "Con la mat dan du nanai," he said in his own clipped way, as if switching to Vietnamese might drive the point deeper. "You have shamed this house." From that day forward, the space between us was not just emotional, it was tactical. I became an asset he no longer wanted to claim. When my mother passed and left her estate to me, I should have expected his reaction. To him, I was not a daughter protecting her mother's wishes. I was an officer who had failed to execute and, worse, had done so publicly. So when he filed to strip me of that inheritance, it felt less like a betrayal and more like the final move in a game he had been playing my whole life. Winning was still all that mattered to him. Only now I was the opponent across the table. And for the first time, I was ready to let him see exactly how I played when the stakes were mine. When the tribunal reconvened, the room seemed to tighten around Judge Cole, as if the ceiling lights had lowered to crown him alone. He took the bench with the ease of an owner, the gavel balanced between his fingers like a habit. My attorney, Captain Sloan, rose to renew a motion to strike an unsigned memo that my father's counsel had slipped into the record. Objection. Lack of foundation and reliability. The author is unidentified and unavailable for cross, Sloan said. Cole did not bother to hide his impatience. Objection overruled. The 2 words fell like a stamp, permanent, unquestioned. Across the aisle, my father's mouth climbed into a tight smile, the kind that grows by fractions each time power performs for him. The opposing counsel, sensing momentum, moved a stack of statements into evidence that should have required witnesses. Sloan objected. Authentication, hearsay, prejudice exceeding probative value. Each attempt met the same answer from the bench. Objection overruled. The cadence became ritual, call and response. A chorus arranged for one voice. Cole began to guide testimony with his own questions, a hand at the small of the narrative's back. He directed the clerk to read a paragraph describing me as impulsive and insubordinate, then cut Sloan off the moment he challenged relevance. Overruled. When Sloan raised privilege, Cole answered before opposing counsel stood. Overruled. The gallery murmured in small ripples, boots shifted, pens tapped. I kept my breathing measured. You cannot outshout a man who controls the volume. You wait until the moment when control becomes dependence. Until then, you study terrain. Cole performed confidence and avoided uncertainty. He kept glancing toward Chambers as if expecting a signal to arrive. My father noticed. He adjusted a cufflink and leaned toward his attorney as if tightening a bolt. A retired admiral appeared by video to label my decision on Silverfish hesitation. The feed froze twice, both times after details that might have favored the defense. Sloan requested a live line or a continuance. Denied. He asked for latitude to cross on source vetting. Limited to mission outcome, Cole ruled. The admiral resumed by reading a prepared statement that reduced inconsistent timestamps to fog and friction. Sloan challenged the opinion as unqualified expert testimony. Overruled. My father's smile returned to its familiar setting. The gallery took the cue and relaxed into the script they thought they were watching. Then came a late disclosed psychological evaluation, a single report commissioned after the incident that contradicted 10 years of clean assessments. Sloan moved to exclude for violation of the discovery order. Overruled. He asked to admit my prior evaluations to correct the record. Denied as cumulative. The defense leaned back like sailors under a sudden fair wind. I pressed my thumb into the scar that crosses my left palm and counted to 4. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Training is not only for gunfire, it is for endurance. I kept my voice inside and waited. Do not swing at every feint. Conserve. Let the pattern reveal the opening that cannot be refused. Sloan adjusted tactics. Less friction, more precision. He asked the intelligence officer to read the metadata printed under a satellite still. The officer hesitated, then recited a timestamp that did not match the weather log for that sector. The room quieted in a way a room does when it hears a seam split. Before doubt could settle, Cole leaned forward. Counselor, confine your questions to the behavioral decision, not the technical pipeline. Sloan objected to the limitation, overruled. I watched a possibility close and made a note of the hinge that closed it. Piece by piece, the record bent where it should have broken. A training photo showing my team rehearsing a secondary egress 2 weeks before the mission was ruled irrelevant to my refusal. Overruled. A request to call the sensor technician who had flagged anomalies in the thermal signatures was denied for security. Overruled. Sloan's voice never rose. He knew fury feeds ceremony. He returned to the table, drew a firm check mark beside a line on his pad, and met my eyes long enough to pass a message without words. Not yet. Wait. From where I sat at the defense table, my line of sight swept the gallery the way I would sweep a tree line before moving my team. You learn to read a room in layers. Posture first, then the eyes, then the small movements people think are invisible. Most of the spectators were uniformed officers I did not know, drawn here by rumor or obligation. A few wore suits that fit like they had been paid for by agencies that never sign their own checks. Halfway back on the left, a senior officer sat with his cap in his lap. The silver eagles on his shoulders were dulled from years of wear. His hair was close-cropped, white now, and his face had the kind of lines that come from both sun and command. When I shifted to take a sip of water, his gaze fixed on my left hand, specifically the scar that cut across my palm in a diagonal slash. It was an old wound, the kind that never fully smooths over, raised slightly against the skin. His eyes narrowed, not in disapproval, but in recognition. That scar was not in my official medical file. The record said laceration, left palm, field treated, nothing more. But the way he stared told me he had seen a wound like it before, maybe even knew exactly when and where it had happened. In another life, another room, I might have asked his name. In this one, I kept my face neutral and let him look until he realized he had been looking too long. He dropped his gaze to the floor, but not before the corner of his mouth tightened, as if he had confirmed something for himself. On the right side, near the aisle, a young female officer was scribbling furiously into a small black notebook. Her hair was pulled into a bun so tight it looked almost painful. Her uniform blouse was pressed flat. I caught the shape of her rank tabs, lieutenant junior grade. Every so often she would pause her writing to glance toward the bench or the prosecution table, then return to her notes at speed. When her eyes finally met mine, the pen froze above the page. It was less than a second, but in that second, the air between us shifted. She was not just watching the proceedings. She was studying me. There was no hostility in her expression, but there was an intensity that felt out of place for a junior officer with no formal role here. I let the silence hold. She blinked, lowered her gaze, and resumed writing. But slower now, more deliberate. It was the kind of adjustment you make when you know the person you're observing has just observed you back. These were not random glances or idle curiosity. The colonel's recognition of my scar and the lieutenant's sudden change in rhythm were small fractures in the surface of the tribunal. They told me that somewhere beyond the scripted hostility of Judge Cole and my father's smirk, there were people in this room who either knew who I really was or were trying to find out. I didn't know yet if that would work in my favor, but I did know this. When the time came to speak the name they were not expecting to hear, those two would understand its weight before anyone else, and I suspected they already had an idea what it might be. Cole adjusted his glasses, leaned forward just enough for his voice to cut through the low hum of the room, and said it like a verdict already carved in stone. Your career is over, Commander. No one believes you. The words landed without ceremony, as if they were a matter of administrative fact, rather than a calculated insult. I kept my face still, but inside, something cold settled into place. I had heard worse in combat zones, whispered over encrypted comms when a mission was failing. Yet, hearing it here, in a courtroom draped in the language of justice, felt different. It was not just an attack on my record. It was a dismissal of everything I had done, everything I had risked. I did not look at him. Instead, my mind went where it always went when someone tried to reduce me to nothing, back to my six. Morales, Kent, Bishop, Rivas, Talcott, and Harlow. Their faces before we deployed were etched in a clarity I could never lose. Morales rolling that river stone between his fingers. Kent grinning like the danger was part of the fun. Bishop methodically checking his kit for the 4th time. Rivas humming under his breath, a tune no one knew but everyone recognized. Talcott scribbling a note to his kids. Harlow tapping my shoulder once before we moved. A silent, "Let's go." I could still see the way the light caught their faces in the moment before we stepped into the dark. There had been no fear then. Only the unspoken understanding that we were each other's insurance. If one of us made it back, we would carry the rest in whatever way we could. Cole's voice tried to pull me back, but I held on to those images. He wanted me to break here, to meet his insult with anger or protest, something he could swat down to prove his point. I gave him nothing. 6 men had walked into Silverfish with me. I was the only one who walked out. The weight of that truth made his taunt feel smaller than he intended. Let him believe no one trusted my word. When the time came, I would not need belief. I would have proof, and I would deliver it in a way that could not be ignored. My thumb brushed the scar across my palm again, a habit and a promise. The stone was still waiting. I rose when Cole's last insult flattened against the walls, and the courtroom exhaled. The microphone waited in its metal cradle. Breath in, hold, breath out, release. Command is not volume. It is a decision repeated until it becomes posture. I walked to the lectern with that decision fixed in my spine, aware of the weight of attention moving with me like current. The stand light cast a white cone across the wood. I set my fingertips on the edge. The scar across my left palm warmed under the lamp as if memory had circulation. I looked at no one and everyone, the habit of someone who has briefed men before dawn and written letters after dusk. My voice was low and even, the way you speak in a helicopter when only one instruction matters. Shadow Vesper. The syllables moved through the room like a blade beneath fabric. For an instant, nothing changed. Then everything did. Attention snapped. Conversations died mid-breath. A captain in the gallery gripped his legal pad by the corner as if the paper might escape. 2 civilians traded a glance that was all arithmetic. Costs in one column, risk in the other. The young lieutenant on the right, who had been writing furiously, stopped mid-stroke. Her pen hovered and stayed. On the left, the old colonel, who had studied my scar, lifted his chin. Recognition spread across his face the way tide covers stone. Slow. Absolute. Behind him, a petty officer crossed himself so quickly I might have missed it if I had blinked. I looked to the bench last. Cole did not face me at first. He glanced at my father, a cut of the eyes that asked a question neither of them could afford to say aloud. My father's mouth opened, then shut. He had always liked chains of command that obeyed him. He was watching one slip his grasp. Cole finally looked at me. His knuckles paled around the gavel. His voice tried to find its old register and failed. "What did you say, Commander?" I kept my hands where he could see them. I let the silence travel one more beat. Then I gave him the same 2 words, delivered with the clarity of a grid coordinate. Shadow Vesper. The gavel slid from his grip and struck the bench with a hard crack that sounded like a starting pistol. He flinched. The courtroom flinched with him. The smirk that had lived at the corner of his mouth all morning vanished as if wiped away. His pupils widened. A flush climbed his collar. "How do you know that name?" I did not answer. Sometimes truth is not a sentence, it is a mirror. You hold it up and let a man see what he is. Around us the air thickened with movement. The representative from the Department of Defense stood at once, sliding his chair back with the careful precision of training. He stepped into the well, spoke to the bailiff in a low voice, and produced a credential I had not seen since my last year in uniform. The bailiff nodded and disappeared through the side door at a controlled jog. My father shifted in his chair. The confidence he wore like a tailored coat no longer fit. The seams pulled, the shoulders sagged. He looked smaller without the expectation of victory to inflate him. He searched my face for an explanation he could dismiss and found none. Power, when denied, breeds confusion before it breeds anger. I watched that sequence move across him like weather rolling over water. Behind me, Captain Sloan did not touch my arm or whisper advice. He squared his files into a neat stack and waited. A professional who understood that a new chain of command had stepped into the room, and it did not include the bench. The court reporter's fingers hovered above her keys. Cole tried to rebuild procedure. Commander Whitfield, the relevance of that phrase is unclear to this tribunal. You will explain yourself. The tone carried less authority than habit. He lifted the gavel and set it down again without striking wood, as if the tool had grown heavy in his hand. I let my gaze travel once more across the gallery. Some faces turned toward the door, some toward the seal on the wall, some toward me. I thought of Morales and his river stone, of Kent's grin, of Bishop's lists, of the promise we made to mark our dead with something the living could carry. 2 words had done the work. The room would do the rest. I did not need to raise my voice. The architecture carried it for me. The name was a key. Now every locked door in this building remembered it could open. For once. The hallway erupted the instant the gavel struck. Doors swung, radios crackled. Heels beat a quick rhythm across tile. A bailiff jogged toward a side corridor, guided by the man from the Department of Defense, who now wore authority like a visible badge. 2 officers in dress whites posted at the courtroom entrance. Another blocked the elevator with a flat palm. The air smelled like cold metal and burnt coffee. I stepped into the corridor and felt the temperature drop. The glass along the wall reflected a moving puzzle of uniforms and suits. Ranks and agencies layered until the hallway looked like a parade drawn in haste. The young lieutenant from the gallery stood by the drinking fountain, notebook closed now. She watched me without pretending otherwise. My father crossed faster than I expected. He was always quickest when control slipped. He stopped close enough that I could see the fine blue weave of his tie. His eyes were bright with anger and calculation. "What did you just do?" he asked, each word tight, as if he were holding pressure on a wound. "By the time you know, it will be too late," I said. My voice stayed level. He looked toward the courtroom door, where Cole had not yet emerged. Doubt settled across his face like a shadow that would not lift. The corridor filled with clipped phrases. Stand by, copy, hold for confirmation. A civilian presented a credential I recognized from my last decade in uniform, the kind that opens rooms without knocking. He nodded once to the lieutenant and pointed toward a stairwell marked with a red placard. She disappeared down the steps with the posture of someone reassigned. Captain Sloan joined me at the wall, files under his arm. "They will compartmentalize, classify, remove jurisdiction," he said. "We hold position and wait for the new chain to declare itself." I nodded. Waiting is not passive. It lets gravity finish what you start. My father tried again, softer. "Yara, this is not necessary. You could have handled this like family." He used that word as leverage, not comfort. I thought of my mother and the way she wrote her will in plain terms so no one could twist her meaning. "Family handled it when she signed her name," I said. "You ignored that order." He flinched. He hated being spoken to in the language of command. Down the hall, the old colonel who had studied my scar stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He gave a single nod when our eyes met, the kind you trade across a dangerous river. A door opened near him. I glimpsed a windowless room and a folder stamped "Eyes Only." The DoD representative vanished inside with 2 others. The door shut with a padded click that sounded like a verdict. This was the first tile falling in a long row. I could feel the line of them stretching into rooms I had never entered. Up staircases guarded by card readers, through offices where decisions were written into language that erased their authors. The tribunal was never the destination. It was the trigger. 2 words had pulled a pin. The mechanism was moving under its own spring. I had seen machines like this wake before. Once set in motion, they rarely stopped where their makers intended. I pressed my thumb across the scar in my palm and counted my breath. The stones we promised each other felt heavy in my pocket, even though they were not there. I pictured 6 small markers on 6 quiet graves. Remembered Morales tapping his stone on a table before we rolled a map. The hallway noise sharpened, then receded, like surf. My father squared his shoulders as if to reclaim height. "You think this ends with a name," he said. "It will not." "No," I said. "It begins with one." The bailiff returned and signaled. The courtroom would reconvene under new instructions. Sloane clipped his pen into his pocket and nodded toward the door. I took my seat with the same care I used to take a firing position. Small adjustments. Steady frame. Eyes open. This was only the beginning. The rest of the line had not fallen yet, but it would. The bailiff opened the door and the hallway noise collapsed into order. We rose as one. The courtroom felt taller. Judge Harrison Cole did not return to the bench. Instead, Admiral Sylvia Marlowe stepped through the side door with a stack of portfolios. She did not sit until every eye had stopped moving. "Be seated," she said. The command was gentle and final. She looked at the clerk. "Record that I am presiding under delegated authority from the Office of the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs." My father shifted beside his counsel as if a chair he trusted had tilted. His confidence depended on familiarity. Nothing about Admiral Marlowe was familiar to him. To me, she was. Known by reputation and by the clean lines her decisions left on battlefields we never acknowledged in public. She placed the portfolios on the bench and opened the top one. "This matter is dissolved in its current form," she said. "All filings associated with docket 1745 are now classified. Parties will surrender notes and unofficial copies to the bailiff for secure disposition." Her voice did not rise. The gallery rippled. Pens were set down, folders turned inward. The court reporter paused as the clerk handed her a sealed envelope. Across the aisle my attorney sat still, hands folded, as if stillness were an oath. Admiral Marlowe continued. "The tribunal convened on a petition challenging the fitness of Commander Yara Whitfield to inherit under a private will. The petition relies on characterizations of operational conduct that are not accurate within the record now before me. Those characterizations arose from a partial narrative that cannot be evaluated in an open forum. Effective immediately, the United States Navy withdraws support for any proceeding that relies on that narrative." My father inhaled to object, then saw the rank on the shoulder boards in front of him. He looked for Cole, found only an empty chair, and set his jaw the way a man sets a broken finger. Marlowe turned a page. "Counsel for the plaintiff will receive a sealed notice of classification scope. Violations will be prosecuted. Counsel for the defense will receive a letter of correction to the service record of Commander Whitfield. The court recognizes that actions taken by Commander Whitfield during a prior operation were consistent with standing rules of engagement and mission authority." A small sound escaped my father, not a word, more like a hinge catching. He had pursued this case like a campaign. Campaigns depend on maps. Marlowe had redrawn his map in 3 sentences. She faced me then. "Commander, you will meet with my office to address administrative adjustments. For now, the remaining matter is restoration of rights unrelated to classified content. The court orders immediate release of contested assets to the beneficiary named in the will of Elaine Whitfield." The name steadied me. My mother did not belong to any classification rubric. Her handwriting on the will was tidy and stubborn. I felt my thumb find the scar in my palm, a private signal to stand straight. Marlowe closed the portfolio. "Bailiff, begin collection and clearance." 2 security officers moved down the aisles with locked cases. The young lieutenant I had noticed earlier stepped forward to assist, now wearing a badge I recognized from secure facilities. She did not look at me as she worked. Her focus was mechanical and exact. My father watched the papers leave his reach. His eyes were bright, not with tears, but with a heat that had nowhere to go. For the first time since this began, he had nothing to perform for the room. He turned, searching for an ally, and found none. Admiral Marlowe rose. "This session is concluded under seal." She tapped the portfolios into a square stack and gave a brief nod. We stood again. The benches creaked. As the bailiff opened the door, corridor air slid across the floor. I gathered my files, felt the weight of them change from defense to proof, and let the new shapes settle into my hands. My father remained seated, stunned into stillness, as if the room had moved on without him and taken his voice along. The session ended under seal, and the quiet of the courtroom triggered a louder memory. Silverfish rose like heat across a tarmac. We launched at last light under a slate sky. I repeated the plan: primary ingress at the east door, secondary hold, exfil through the drainage cut if the room turned. We crossed the alley 2 by 2. The warehouse stood as a black box without breath. No vent plumes, no generator thrum, only wind sliding through a seam. Kent covered high. Bishop watched the street. Morales ghosted the lock and breathed clear. Inside, the air tasted of dust and laundry soap, as if someone had perfumed an empty room. Silence is not safety. It is warning. We stacked on an interior door. Harlow set a soft charge for a hinge clip. I counted down and felt the team lean forward as one body. The door moved without protest and swung to a room that refused to answer. No voices, no footfalls, only a pipe tapping in the dark. Rivas floated the thermal reader. The screen bloomed with heat where there should have been noise from adjacent structures. The first blast arrived from the wrong quadrant. Pressure punched my chest. Grit filled my mouth. A shaped charge in a pillar turned concrete into knives. The world narrowed to white, then to a ringing that swallowed orders. Kent fell to a knee. Talcott shoved him behind a pallet and took his lane. Muzzle flashes stitched the dark from a mezzanine the satellite stills had not shown. I called abort, south wall, smoke, and move. My voice shook once and then found steel. We learned the trap in pieces. Decoy heaters posed as bodies. A delivery truck idled near a side door that did not exist in our imagery. The stair had been cut and re-welded to funnel us. Bishop tried to lift the medic bag. Blood spread under his plate like a stubborn flower. Rivas threw smoke. It hung low and sweet. The mixture burned the throat. I felt the cut in my palm when glass bit deep as I pulled Morales over a spill of bottles. He laughed at my cursing and then stopped. Hours earlier he had pressed a pebble into my glove. A river stone he carried for luck. Smooth and cool. Weight like a promise. He said that if he walked out he owed me one. And if he did not, I should put it where he could see it. I closed my fist on air and kept moving. We reached the south wall because the brick there had been patched with soft mortar. I had marked it and prayed I was right. Harlow shouldered through first. I counted heads, 6, then 5. Kent began describing a fishing trip with his brother, a trick he used to keep me from checking his wound. I told him to save the story for the truck. He went quiet. Talcott's lips moved. I read the words as I had that morning. Tell my kids I kept my word. Outside, the air tasted like wet iron. We crawled the culvert single file. Bishop's boots dragged. I hooked my arm through his harness and pulled. The shooting receded, then surged as the attackers shifted to flank the cut. I called the abort again on open channel. Static clawed the edges. The watch floor answered too late. Hold position. Quick reaction force inbound. Negative air support. The second blast lifted the earth beside us. Harlow turned and took it. When dust settled, he pushed me forward with his forearm and said, "Go." I went because refusal would have wasted his gift. Command is a ledger kept in blood. Mine has never balanced. By the time I reached the spillway grate, only 2 voices answered, then 1, then none. My left hand leaked through a field bandage. The wound opened each time I braced on stone. I keyed the beacon and watched its light beat like a small heart. The rescue found me wedged under poured concrete, tasting copper. The helicopter door swung. The medic's mouth shaped a joke I could not hear. We buried my team in pieces under names that kept the story clean. Later, on a range far from that city, I lined 6 small stones on a broken wall, a row for men the record would never carry. When I pressed my thumb to the scar today in court, grit from that wall lived under my skin again. Silverfish did not end. It traveled forward inside me. The tribunal called it conduct and judgment. I called it the promise I still owed 6 graves. The stones are small, the weight is not. I carry them when I speak. I will carry them until the account closes with the truth at last. Admiral Marlowe asked to speak with me outside chambers, in a corridor cleared by 2 security officers. The building hummed with the kind of quiet that follows a shock. She stood close enough that I could read the small scuffs on the leather of her portfolio. When she spoke, her voice stayed low, not secretive, just disciplined. Cole is not the center of this, she said. He is a symptom. Someone higher doctored the pipeline that fed Silverfish and the narrative that followed. We have fragments. I want you prepared for what that means. I waited. She watched my hands, the way I flexed the left when the scar tightened. Say it straight, I said. We have reason to believe a flag-level counselor and a civilian liaison manipulated imagery, suppressed human that contradicted the timing, and pushed a hostile source into the chain as if it were friendly. The edits were routed through a compartment that existed on paper for 6 months and then vanished. Cole gave legal cover after the fact. He did not build the lie. Heat rose behind my ribs. Not anger, not yet. The old feeling of reading a pattern finally lit. Names, I said. They will come, but not yet, she answered. If I speak them before the warrants are signed, the doors harden and the files walk. What I can tell you is this. The prints on the edits match a signature I have seen on 2 other compromised operations. Different theaters, same long shadow. The hostages, I asked. Were they ever there? Unlikely, she said. We think the cell used decoys and chatters seeded to trigger our template response. They wanted your team in that room. The motive reads like a ledger. Favors owed, budgets defended, careers built on decisive action metrics. I breathed once, slow. The corridor lights made a soft hum like a generator on standby. What do you need from me? Your memory, every discrepancy you flagged before launch, every request you made that was denied, every line you drew on the map that night, she said. And something else. When this widens, they will try to paint you as vindictive, using grief to settle old scores. I need you steady, not silent, precise. I nodded. I can do precise. She studied me for a beat. Good. Because precision is how we keep this from turning into spectacle. Shadow Vesper survived for a reason. Echo Vigil exists for a reason. We clean our own house before we hunt outside. I looked past her to the sealed door. Cole will fall, I said. He already has, she answered. What matters is the hand behind him. When we pull that hand into the light, do not lose yourself in the moment. Justice, not theater. I pressed my thumb across the scar and let the pressure anchor me. The past was not finished. It was returning with a name I did not yet have. I would wait, but I would not forget. We were alone in the witness waiting room, the hum of the air vent louder than either of us spoke for the first minute. My father stood near the window, hands behind his back like he was still inspecting cadets on a parade ground. When he turned, his jaw was tight, but his voice came out almost casual. I took the money, he said. No build-up, no apology. A substantial sum, enough to retire without worrying about what the markets do. I didn't move, didn't speak. He took my silence as permission to keep going. They offered it after Silverfish. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure, pretend the ops after action was clean. They didn't tell me every detail, but I knew enough to understand it would sink you if it came out. His eyes searched my face. I thought you'd be discharged. Dishonorably. If that happened, you'd lose your commission, your pension. You'd burn through your mother's inheritance just trying to survive. I wanted it kept in the family. In my control. In your control, I repeated, steady. Not mine. He exhaled sharply, as if I'd just missed the point. If you'd been cleared, I would have released the funds. But the more I saw your name in those reports, the more I believed you were finished. I was protecting our legacy. I leaned forward. Whose legacy? His eyes flickered. There it was, something close to shame, buried under years of certainty that his decisions were always the right ones. Your mother built what she left us. I wasn't going to watch it vanish because my daughter refused to play the game. The game got 6 people killed, I said. For the first time, he looked away. That wasn't my call. No, but you helped bury the truth. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. And that, more than any explanation, told me exactly how deep his compromise ran. For a moment, the sharpness in his face softened. He sat down opposite me, resting his forearms on his knees. I've lost more than you think, he said quietly. Friends I served with for 30 years won't speak to me. Your mother's family barely acknowledges I exist. Every time I walk into the officers' club, I feel the room shift. I studied him. His voice was missing the steel I'd grown up with. There was something raw there, something I wasn't sure I'd ever seen. You think that compares to losing a team in the field? I asked. His gaze met mine. No, but it's still loss. For a fraction of a second, I saw a man who might have been capable of undoing what he'd done. If he had found the courage sooner. There was a thin thread between us in that instant. almost enough to bridge the years of mistrust. Almost. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that somewhere beneath the ambition, the control, and the quiet deals, my father still valued the truth. But belief was a luxury I could not afford. "Dad," I said, my voice even. "Regret isn't the same as making it right." The softness in his eyes hardened again, shutters closing. "And vengeance isn't the same as justice," he replied. The thread snapped. Whatever that moment was, it passed, and we both knew it wouldn't come back. We didn't get more than 5 minutes before Admiral Marlowe appeared in the doorway, her expression clipped. "We have a development," she said, scanning both of us but addressing me. "The manipulator I told you about? He's still active. And it's not just military ops. He's been inserting himself into civilian cases, quietly influencing outcomes." My father frowned. "Including this one?" Marlowe's jaw tightened. "It's possible. We traced a communications packet from his known network to Cole's chambers 2 weeks before your hearing began. Encrypted, routed through 3 civilian IPs. Not enough for a warrant yet, but enough to know he's watching." The air between us shifted. My father straightened in his chair, his voice low but firm. "If he's touching my case, it's no longer about Yara and me." "It never was just about you and me," I said. Marlowe nodded once. "Which means the tribunal may not be the last room where you two end up sitting across from each other. If he's pulling strings here, the fallout could go beyond property and inheritance. This could get federal." My father's eyes locked on mine. For the first time in this fight, his expression carried something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. I stood, adjusting my jacket. "Then we're not done." No one argued. Not this time. The grass at Arlington was wet from the early rain, each blade glistening under the thin winter sun. I moved slowly, my boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The rows of white headstones stretched endlessly, perfect in their alignment, each one a name and date carved into stone. But 6 of them had no names, just the inscription, "Known unto God." They were the ones I came for. From my pocket, I pulled the small pouch I'd carried for 3 years. Inside were 6 smooth stones, worn from being turned over in my hands on restless nights. Each one came from the field where we fell, where they fell, and I survived. The dirt had been cleaned away, but the weight of them had not. I knelt at the first headstone and set a stone down gently. "For you, Mac," I murmured, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. At the second, "For Torres." Third, Nguyen. Fourth, Price. Fifth, Holloway. And the 6th, the smallest stone, I held a moment longer before placing it at the base of the last grave. "For Lee," the wind picked up, carrying the sound of the flags snapping above us. I stayed there, kneeling, my hand resting on the final stone, feeling the cold seep through my skin. I didn't cry. I had run out of tears long ago. A quiet set of footsteps approached from behind, measured and unhurried. Admiral Marlowe stopped beside me, her shadow falling across the row. "You kept your promise," she said softly, nodding to the stones. "I told them I would." For a moment, we both stood in silence, letting the weight of the place do the talking. Then she glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "I'm putting together a new team," she said. "Off the books, fully sanctioned, but not on any roster you'll find. We need someone who knows the difference between a mission and a suicide run. Someone who can see when the intel doesn't fit." "You want me to lead it?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, I do." I looked back at the 6 stones, then at her. "And if I say no?" "You walk away," she replied. "But you know what's still out there. And you know they'll keep doing it unless someone stops them." I stared at the line of headstones, the memory of their last smiles burning behind my eyes. "I'll think about it," I said, though part of me already knew my answer. We met in a quiet corner of the Pentagon, far from the echoing hallways, where everything seemed to linger in the air too long. Marlowe laid a folder on the table between us, but I didn't open it. "If I do this," I said, "I choose my own team. Every name, every position." She nodded. "Done. I get direct comms to you. No layers of middlemen who can filter or bury intel." "Granted. And one more thing, family benefits for my people. Not just the standard stipend. Real support, education, housing, medical, whether they make it home or not." Marlowe's eyes sharpened. "That's not a small ask. It's not negotiable. If they're willing to put their lives on the line for this, their families shouldn't pay the price for someone else's bad call. A beat passed before she nodded again. I'll have it written in. Only then did I touch the folder. Inside were preliminary op briefs, half redacted, but enough to tell me the targets were real, the danger was real, and the stakes were higher than I'd imagined. Then I'll do it, I said, closing the folder, but on my terms. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. On your terms. That night, I stood in my apartment with the folder open on the table, the lamplight spilling over the pages, maps, names, faces. None of them knew yet that they were on someone's list. I thought about my father, about Cole, about the manipulator still moving pieces in the dark. None of this was over. But that wasn't why I said yes. I wasn't coming back for him. I wasn't coming back to reclaim some tarnished family honor. The tribunal, the inheritance, the headlines, those things were small against the 6 stones I had placed that morning. I was coming back because somewhere out there, someone else was getting fed a bad briefing. Someone else was walking into a trap, trusting the intel, believing in the mission. And no one was there to tell them to stop. I wouldn't let another team be lured to their deaths by a lie. Not if I could help it, not if I could stand in the way. I closed the folder, the decision solidifying in my chest like a weight I was finally strong enough to carry. When I called Marlo, my voice was calm. I'm in, I said. On the other end, she didn't thank me, didn't congratulate me. She only said, I'll send the first name tomorrow. And just like that, I was back. The first name came the next morning, just as Marlo promised. A familiar one, Sergeant Brooks, former communications officer, brother to Mac, who had fallen beside me in Silverfish. I didn't need to think twice. I called him directly. From there, the list grew. Corporal Elise Nguyen, no relation to our Nguyen, but she'd served under him once. Her application had been sitting in some forgotten drawer for years, blocked by someone who thought she asked too many questions. Perfect. Then there was Lieutenant Price's cousin, an EOD specialist with a quiet, steady presence and a resume that spoke for itself. I remembered how Price used to say his cousin could defuse a bomb while reciting Shakespeare. I tracked him down in a small Midwest town where he'd been fixing farm equipment for the past year. He didn't hesitate to say yes. Every name I chose had a link to the 6 who never came home. Not because I wanted to replace them, but because I wanted to honor them. These people knew the stories behind the uniforms. They'd heard the laughter, the inside jokes, the stubborn refusal to quit. They carried the same loss, even if from a step removed. We met for the first time in a windowless room at a secure facility, the walls bare except for a single clock. I stood at the head of the table, my notes in front of me, but I didn't need them. This team isn't here to make headlines, I said. We're here to stand in the space between truth and the people who want it buried. We don't take missions without knowing what's real. We don't accept intel that smells wrong. And if something doesn't fit, we walk away until it does. They listened. No interruptions, no sideways glances, just quiet understanding. I pulled a small metal tag from my pocket and set it on the table. The words Echo Vigil were engraved into the steel. That's our name, I told them. We keep watch for those who no longer can. One by one, they nodded. In that moment, Echo Vigil was born. 2 days later, I drove to my father's house. The lights were on, the curtains drawn just like they'd been when I was a child. I didn't knock. I didn't need to see him. The study door was ajar. His desk sat exactly where it always had, neat as a parade line. I stepped inside, the smell of old books and cedar heavy in the air. From my pocket, I took out one last stone. This one was darker than the others, its edges rougher. It came from the same ground as the 6 I'd left at Arlington, but I had saved it for this moment. I set it in the center of his desk, on top of a stack of neatly aligned papers. No note, no explanation. He would understand. It wasn't an olive branch, and it wasn't a threat. It was a marker, a reminder of what had been lost, and what couldn't be bought back with settlements, influence, or silence. I stepped out of the study, closing the door behind me. I didn't look back as I left. The next morning, I sat in a briefing room with Echo Vigil. A map stretched across the wall, dotted with red markers. The mission file in front of me was labeled Operation Nightglass. On paper, it was a standard counterintelligence op: intercept and neutralize a foreign asset moving through a neutral zone. But buried in the data were traces, the kind I'd seen before, patterns that matched the false intel from Silverfish. This wasn't just about an outside threat. This was about finding the hand that had fed my team to the wolves 3 years ago. I looked around the table. Brooks was watching me, waiting for the call. Nguyen's pen hovered over her notebook. Price's cousin sat forward, eyes locked on mine. "This isn't just another op," I said. "It's the first step to finding out who's been pulling the strings all this time. And when we do, we make sure they never pull them again." No one asked why. They didn't need to. As we stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass wall, older, harder, but still standing. Justice wasn't about winning in court. Justice was taking back the right to tell the truth. And I was just getting started. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.